Sarah Martinez stared at the stack of medical bills covering her kitchen table like a paper snowstorm that never melted. Each envelope held another piece of her breaking heart, another number that seemed impossible to reach. The morning sun streamed through her small apartment window in Riverside, Texas, casting long shadows across the bills that totaled more than she could earn in 5 years. Her 5-year-old daughter Emma sat on the living room floor, carefully coloring in a princess coloring book. The little girl's bald head was covered by a bright pink bandana decorated with butterflies. Emma had been fighting leukemia for 8 months now, and each treatment brought new hope mixed with crushing financial reality. Sarah watched her daughter's concentrated face as she chose between a purple and blue crayon, and felt her chest tighten with a familiar mix of love and terror. 3 weeks ago, Dr. Peterson at Children's Medical Center had delivered news that should have been celebration-worthy. Emma's latest test results showed significant improvement. The experimental treatment was working better than anyone had dared hope. But the same treatment that was saving Emma's life was destroying Sarah's ability to keep them together. The bills told the story in cold, clinical numbers. Emergency room visits when Emma's fever spiked to dangerous levels, $8,400. Specialized blood work that had to be sent to laboratories in Houston, $6,200. The experimental medication that cost more per dose than Sarah's monthly rent, $42,000, and counting. Each number represented a moment when Sarah had to choose between her daughter's life and their financial survival. She chose Emma every single time, without hesitation. Sarah worked 2 jobs before Emma got sick. During the day, she managed inventory at Rodriguez Auto Parts, a small family-owned business where the owner, Miguel Rodriguez, treated his employees like family. In the evenings, she cleaned offices downtown, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies through empty buildings while most people were home having dinner with their families. The work was hard, but it paid enough to cover their small apartment, groceries, and Emma's daycare. Everything changed on a Tuesday in March when Emma complained that her legs hurt, and she felt too tired to play. Sarah initially thought it was just a growth spurt, or maybe Emma was coming down with a cold. But when Emma's legs hurt so much she couldn't walk, and her skin looked pale as winter snow, Sarah knew something was seriously wrong. The emergency room visit that changed their lives forever lasted 14 hours. Sarah held Emma's hand while doctors ran test after test, each one ruling out simpler explanations and pointing towards something much more frightening. When Dr. Peterson finally sat down with Sarah in a small, windowless room that smelled like disinfectant and fear, his words hit her like a physical blow. "Mrs. Martinez, Emma has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's a form of childhood cancer that affects the blood and bone marrow." Sarah remembered feeling like the room was spinning, like she was falling through space while sitting perfectly still. The doctor continued explaining treatment options, survival rates, and the importance of starting chemotherapy immediately, but his words sounded like they were coming from underwater. All she could think about was Emma's bright laugh and how it might be taken away. The first month of treatment became a blur of hospital stays, insurance phone calls, and sleepless nights. Sarah's insurance through Rodriguez Auto Parts covered some of the basic treatment costs, but experimental medications and specialized procedures created bills that grew faster than she could comprehend. Miguel Rodriguez was understanding when Sarah needed time off for Emma's appointments, but he couldn't hold her position indefinitely when she missed entire weeks during Emma's worst periods. Sarah lost her evening cleaning job when she couldn't maintain the schedule anymore. Spending nights in the hospital with Emma meant she couldn't push that cart through empty office buildings, couldn't earn the extra $400 a week that had made their life possible. Her world gradually shrunk to the size of Emma's hospital room, where they watched cartoons on a small television and counted the days between treatments. The insurance company became her constant adversary, a faceless enemy that spoke in policy numbers and coverage limitations. Every experimental treatment required approval that took weeks to receive. Every specialist consultation meant new paperwork and new opportunities for denial. Sarah spent hours on hold with insurance representatives, explaining over and over why Emma needed treatments that weren't considered standard care. "Mrs. Martinez, we understand this is a difficult time," the insurance representative would say in a voice trained to sound sympathetic while delivering devastating news. But the treatment Dr. Peterson is recommending isn't covered under your current policy. You'll need to pay out of pocket and submit for possible reimbursement. Out of pocket meant $20,000 payments that Sarah couldn't imagine making. It meant choosing between Emma's life-saving treatment and keeping a roof over their heads. It meant lying awake at 3 in the morning, calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to hope. Sarah started selling everything they owned that had any value. Emma's father had left when Emma was 2 years old, disappearing without forwarding addresses or child support payments. So Sarah faced this crisis completely alone. She sold her car and started taking the bus to the hospital, carrying Emma's overnight bag and her own exhaustion on 2-hour rides across town. She sold her grandmother's jewelry, furniture that held memories from better times, and clothes she'd been saving for special occasions that might never come. The apartment manager, Mrs. Chun, was initially understanding when Sarah was late with rent payments. Mrs. Chun had grandchildren Emma's age and couldn't imagine putting a sick child out on the street. But understanding had limits, and after 3 months of partial payments and promises, Mrs. Chun had to follow the rules that governed her business. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but I have to give you official notice," Mrs. Chun said, standing in Sarah's doorway with papers that would change everything. "You have 30 days to bring the rent current, or you'll have to move out. I don't want to do this, but the property owner is pressuring me." 30 days felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Sarah knew she couldn't catch up on 3 months of back rent while Emma needed daily medications that cost more than most people's mortgages. She started making phone calls to family members she hadn't spoken to in years, swallowing pride that felt like broken glass in her throat. Her sister Maria in California listened sympathetically, but had her own family to support and a husband who'd been laid off from his construction job. Her brother Carlos in New Mexico wanted to help, but was already struggling with his wife's diabetes medication costs. Extended family members expressed concern and offered prayers, but prayers couldn't pay medical bills or prevent eviction notices. Sarah discovered that being poor and desperate meant navigating a system designed to help people like her, but only if she could prove she was poor and desperate enough. Social services required documentation that took weeks to process. Charity organizations had waiting lists and eligibility requirements that seemed designed to exclude people who needed help most urgently. Emergency assistance programs could help with utilities but not rent, or rent but not medical bills, creating a maze of partial solutions that never addressed the complete problem. The hospital social worker, Janet Morrison, became Sarah's guide through this confusing world of potential help. Janet was a woman in her 50s who had seen hundreds of families face similar crises, and she knew which resources might actually produce results versus which ones would waste precious time with false hope. "There's an emergency assistance fund through the Children's Hospital Foundation," Janet explained during one of their meetings in her small office decorated with children's artwork. "But the application process takes 6 weeks, and they can only help with medical bills, not housing costs." 6 weeks might as well have been 6 years when Sarah had 30 days to avoid eviction. Every potential source of help came with timing that didn't match her crisis, requirements she couldn't meet, or assistance that covered only part of her overwhelming needs. Emma remained remarkably positive throughout this chaos, displaying the resilience that children often show in situations that would break adults completely. She made friends with other children in the cancer ward, sharing toys and stories as if having leukemia was just another thing kids dealt with, like learning to ride bicycles or starting kindergarten. Emma's strength gave Sarah the courage to keep fighting, but it also made the stakes feel even higher. "Mama, are we going to move to a new house?" Emma asked one evening as Sarah helped her with the puzzle they'd been working on for 3 days. Emma's small fingers struggled with pieces that would have been easy before chemotherapy affected her coordination, but she refused to give up on completing the picture of a farm with horses and chickens. "I don't know yet, baby," Sarah answered honestly. She'd promised herself never to lie to Emma about important things, even when the truth was frightening. "But whatever happens, we'll be together, okay?" Emma nodded seriously, then brightened as she found where a puzzle piece belonged. "Look, Mama, I think this horse is running toward the barn. Maybe he's excited about dinner. These moments of normal childhood wonder happened in the middle of Sarah's worst nightmares, reminding her why she was fighting so hard to hold their life together. Emma deserved stability, comfort, and the chance to complete puzzles without worrying about whether they'd have a home tomorrow. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Sarah opened an official-looking envelope that arrived with the regular mail. Inside was a document from Child Protective Services, responding to a report that Emma was living in an unstable environment. Someone had reported that Sarah might not be able to provide adequate care for a child with serious medical needs. Sarah read the letter 3 times before the words penetrated her shock. A caseworker would be visiting their apartment within the week to assess Emma's living situation and Sarah's ability to provide appropriate care. If the assessment found deficiencies, Emma could be placed in temporary foster care for her own safety and medical well-being. The letter felt like ice water in Sarah's veins. She had fought cancer, insurance companies, medical bills, and eviction notices, but the thought of losing Emma to the system designed to protect children was the one threat she couldn't face. Emma was her world, her reason for breathing, the only thing that mattered more than life itself. That night, after Emma fell asleep clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, Sarah sat at their kitchen table surrounded by bills and stared at the CPS letter until her tears blurred the words. She had 7 days to prove she could provide a stable home for Emma, but she had no money, no permanent housing, and no clear path forward. For the first time since Emma's diagnosis, Sarah allowed herself to consider the possibility that she might not be strong enough to win this fight. Sometimes life pushes people so far into a corner that they can't see any way out. When medical bills pile up like mountains and debt collectors circle like vultures, a mother's worst nightmare becomes real, losing the one thing that matters most. But in the darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, unexpected heroes can emerge from the most unlikely places. This is the true story of Sarah Martinez, a single mother whose world crumbled when her 5-year-old daughter Emma was diagnosed with leukemia. As hospital bills reached impossible heights and her savings disappeared, Sarah faced a terrifying choice: lose her home